Welcome to the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast. If your job involves working with or influencing people's behavior, this podcast offers invaluable insights into what makes people tick. Through personal interviews that are thoughtful and surprising, we explore the full range of the roots to people smarts that can help you make or break your own career. My name is Marie Gervais, and with a PhD in culture and learning in the workplace and my own cultural journey, I bring the mysteries of human beings at work around the world to you. Through conversations with very diverse people, examining the groups they were born into and the ones they chose to belong to, my podcast takes a deep dive into why people do what they do and how they belong. Hone your skills to manage others and to be a better human being at work with the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast. And now for today's episode. Hello, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. Today, I am very happy to present to you Anthony A. Dix Jr. Anthony is a leader's leader. His passion for leadership development is seen through his work with emerging nonprofit leaders. He has spent over 2 decades preparing people with diverse responsibilities to reach their optimal leadership potential. And this is something that he has honed himself in his marriage with his wife. They are a wonderful complement of vision and operations. Anthony, the visionary, and his wife, the operations, and together they make a great duo and have this business, which I will tell you more about in a bit. His uniqueness is in seeing the interplay between executive leadership and operations and how vision impacts systems. Currently, Anthony is a doctoral student in the Strategic Leadership Program at Liberty University and is also a certified John C. Maxwell team member and a DISC coach. Anthony transforms leaders as the senior leadership consultant at 180 Management Group, which his wife founded and for which he works. And he said that his uniqueness is that he's married to his boss, which is wonderful. Thank you, Anthony, for that insight and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so very much for having me. I'm excited to engage in this wonderful conversation and I'm looking forward to just talking a little bit more. And as you've heard, yes, my wife is my boss. So hopefully nothing I say in this conversation gets me fired. So we'll see how this goes.
Yeah, we would hate for that to happen.
Yeah, that would be terrible.
So please tell the audience a little bit about who you are outside of the bio, a little bit personal information, where you were born, you had a family. Tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I am the son of a preacher man, but not like the song.
Oh, no, that's a terrible song. I don't know how it ever got popular. It's awful.
Yeah.
I mean, the words are awful and everything's awful. Somehow it sticks in your mind, but please go on.
Yeah, that chorus is great. But I am the son of a Baptist pastor, and my wife and I, Miriam, have been married for almost 22 years now. We got 3 wonderful college-age children. One of them is a recent college graduate, and we got one who's a rising senior and another who is a rising junior. And we now live in Annapolis. And we recently moved here from South Carolina, which is my home state and my home. And in the city of my birth, Columbia, South Carolina, there is a street named Gervais. Yes, Gervais Street. And so I was curious as to how you pronounce your last name. Is it Gervais or Gervais? Because in Columbia, I mean, it can kind of go either way. And that's where my dad's church is actually off of Gervais Street in Columbia, South Carolina. So when I saw your last name, it just reminded me of home.
Wow, I'm going to have to go to Columbia, South Carolina and find Gervais Street.
You can't miss it because the State House is on Gervais Street.
Oh, wow. Well, that was intelligent for them to do that.
That's good. That's good.
So you grew up in South Carolina and then you're not living there anymore. And what did you do between growing up and being in 180 Management? You went to school, you did some other jobs. Fill me in with a little bit of that.
When I get opportunities to speak, I tell them that there's more to that bio than what's on that bio. I am a graduate of North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro, North Carolina. Got an MBA from Webster University, and I've also had some theological education at Lutheran Theological Southern Seminary. So I'm the son of a Baptist pastor who went to a Lutheran seminary, who taught middle and high school mathematics. I was the director of admissions at a seminary. I've done some pastoring for a little while and a host of other things. And now I'm the senior leadership consultant for 180 Management Group. So I've seen leadership at different levels and in different contexts for the last 20 plus years now.
Oh, that is a great intro. Thank you so much for that. Can you share
Oh,
a couple of
sure.
incidents from your childhood that stand out? They may be positive or negative, but they just stand out in your mind in that they had something to do with your leadership and your sense of culture.
Well, when you're a preacher's kid, well, I can't say this for all PKs, but for like me and many in my generation, there was no way to avoid the stage, right? So you were going to be put in front of people. I have three sisters, and my dad would do revival and stuff like that. We would always, on that Friday night of revival, be the group that sung the song before the preaching. Right. So it'd be me and my three sisters singing some song off the radio, whether it was Bill Gaither or the Whining. And we would be singing these songs before my dad got up to preach. And so we were always in front of people, always having to either speak or sing or perform. And I remember my birthday, I think I was around 8 years old. And of course, it's African American History Month. And my father is the pastor of a Black Baptist church. So guess who gets to do the I Have a Dream speech? From heart, right? Not reading it off of a script, but I had to memorize a vast majority of that, starting at from the point where Dr. King says, "I say to you today, my friends." I had to start from that and go all the way to the end where it says free at last, free at last. And so seeing the interaction between the platform and the people, and then the responsibility that comes after that. I wasn't seeing the same after that. And that has been kind of like the trajectory of my life, that leadership platforms you in one way or another. And that's one of the ways in which I kind of learned about, one, the power of communication, but two, the power of leadership when you are literally in front of people. Because to lead means that you are with the people, but you are also a couple of steps ahead, not because you're more intellectual or you're brilliant, you're just a few steps ahead, whether it be by gift or by responsibility. And so that's one of the earlier times in my life where I learned a little bit about some of the nuances of leadership.
I love that story. And it's really interesting that you would say that story because when I woke up this morning, the first thing that came into my mind is stand and deliver.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
I was thinking, I may have messed up in other areas of my life as a mother, but I taught my kids to stand and deliver, and they can.
That's
And I
good.
think when children of pastors' kids who don't know how to stand and deliver, how did they do that? They must have worked very hard to avoid it because you have a natural platform, you have a warm audience,
Hmm.
and you get to
Hmm.
develop not only speaking skills, you get to sing. So, singing together with others and singing alone, you get to learn to prepare things and to test them on an audience and
Hmm.
see how that works. And you get
Hmm.
feedback all the time too, because it's a warm audience. So, when you told that story, I was thinking, wow, it's so interesting that I woke up thinking stand and deliver.
Oh, wow.
I'm listening to an audiobook right now where the woman who's the protagonist in the story is a graphic designer, and she definitely did not learn how to stand and deliver. But in the book, because she's given
Oh.
the platform, she realizes she has a talent for it. And you were given the platform, and you had
Hmm.
a talent for it too, and probably a history with the legacy of your family, don't you think?
Yeah. At 8 years old, I didn't know what I didn't know. So I didn't have enough sense to know if I had a talent or not.
No,
I
but you
didn't
do
know. So
now.
I do now. And that comes from some warm audiences. And this is one of the things that as you were talking, that I never really thought about, how as a preacher's kid, you learned leadership also in the aspect of you're being held to a higher standard than the other children in the congregation.
Yes, you are.
Like there's certain things that they can get away with that you can't. And
Hmm.
it doesn't necessarily seem fair. And you may be born into it, so to speak. It's not something that you did or did not do that puts that kind of burden to live so publicly. And that's another aspect of kind of how I grew up, having to cultivate a speaking gift, a speaking talent, or a talent to just be in front of people, but also relying on the wisdom of others to recognize stuff that you don't see in yourself. Like, it's not like I said, Daddy, I want to do the I Have a Dream speech. No, I was told. I
Hmm.
was told this is what you're doing. And having to do it and receiving that standing ovation afterwards was so affirming that it made me want to do it again.
You must have just knocked it out of the park.
They might have just been real warm. I didn't, I did okay. Yeah, I think I did okay. It's
Well,
hard to sound like Dr. King when you ate. You know what I'm saying?
well,
Like,
yeah, that's true. That's true. But still, it's such an inspiring speech. And if you take it to heart and you speak it from your
yes.
heart, it's going to affect
Yeah.
people.
You just made my mind go back. I was just thinking about how I don't know how I got the words interposition and nullification out of my mouth. at 8 years old. I didn't know what they meant, but I definitely knew how to say them. She just got me thinking back on that situation and just how intriguing it was at the time. That's amazing.
That's another leadership piece, is to being able to use language effectively and to not shy away from words in a way that you may otherwise have. So if there's a
Yeah,
big word, you can say it and you know what it means and you can use it. And you can also
yeah,
use shorter words depending on the circumstance. I'm really taken
yeah.
by this example that you gave. But tell me a little bit about when you got older, in your teens or as a young adult. Is there an incident that stands out as formative for you then?
As I said earlier, I'm the only son of my mother and father, so I didn't grow up with brothers. But before I went to undergrad, I went to basic training in AIT. And I had never been on a plane before. And so when we got on the plane to go to Louisville, Kentucky, and then went from there to go to Fort Knox, Kentucky, I didn't know what to expect. I was around people from all over the country. Some people, were different. We had some people who were not speaking the same language or not from where I was from natively. And the way that system works in the United States Army, they picked leaders to lead certain parts of the platoon. And I was picked to be a squad leader. And I didn't think that I was particularly a good candidate for it. I don't think I have an imposing presence. I don't know how to drill something like, well, I'm gonna pick you. And we held that position, and I was afforded the opportunity to call cadence for the platoon when we would march from place to place.
Sorry, I don't know what that
And I
means.
learned.
What does that mean to
So
call
cadence
cadence?
is to call the cadence is when you are in the military formation and you're marching, you call left, right, or left. That's you calling cadence. And there were certain songs that we would sing to keep everybody in step with each other. One of them was count cadence, delayed cadence, count, all one. All you soldier, two, you better do your best. Three, before you find yourself. Four, in the leading rest. One. And so that's one of the cadences that I was asked to by the platoon and allowed by the drill sergeant to call for the entire platoon. And when we were saying our goodbyes, we had this little picture of the platoon and we would write on it, kind of like it was a yearbook. And several of my battle buddies and soldiers would write on there about the strength of my voice and my leadership. That's not something that I didn't go into the military looking for that. I didn't go into basic training expecting that. I expected to be one person among all of these others. In those types of environments, I'm an introvert, so I'm going to shy away from being out front. And that was another instance where I kind of learned a little bit more about leadership and influence. You can be influencing people without any cognizance that you do it naturally.
Mm-hmm. Which is the best kind, really, especially if it's positive influence, which I'm certain it was for you.
Yeah, it was.
So I'm just imagining this in my mind, and I think it would be great fun to be listening to this calling cadence piece, because even with a little bit that you sang now, it'd be great. I'm sure people would love it. It would inspire them. I wonder if that's particular to the U.S. Army, because I don't think I've heard of that ever happening in the Canadian Army.
They probably keep cadence the way it's one way to keep everybody in step.
Mm-hmm.
Bands do it. Bands have like the drummers on the band. Those drills and stuff like that where the drums are playing while the band is marching. That's called the cadence. Actually, a movie called Cadence with Lawrence Fishburne and I think it's Martin Sheen. Yeah.
Wow.
There's
I
a
have
movie
to
called
look this
Cadence.
up now because this is intriguing me.
Please do.
So, yeah.
Mhm.
So, what you learned from that particular incident was that you had influence that you didn't know you had, and you were taking it both humbly, like, I'm part of the group, and also, wow, maybe this is something that I could use and I need to use it wisely. Did you think that?
Yeah, you got me reflecting about it now. I'm reflecting on it as a 47-year-old
Mm-hmm.
thinking back on what was going on when I was 18. I can't really remember what kind of consciousness I had at 18. I do know that the drill sergeants didn't necessarily make being a squad leader look great because there were portions of our development where the squad leader was held accountable for the performance of the squad. And there were certain leadership principles that were taught. We had to go back and clean up behind people. If something was going on with the squad, we would have to do PT while the squad watched, right? And so we were held accountable for other people's actions. We had to be the first in and the last out. And so those types of principles were embedded in us during that 8 to 9 week time frame. And at the time, I probably thought it was a little unfair and it was definitely unattractive. Like, who would want to do that? So nobody volunteered to be a squad leader or platoon guy. They were kind of elected. And eventually, once my crew became squad leaders, we kept it for the majority of the training program after seeing several other squad leaders get fired.
It
But
called you to a level
yeah,
of accountability that you had to either accept and show up for
yeah,
or not.
yep,
And if you didn't, then your platoon would suffer and you would suffer. And there's also that learning to take a hit for the team and to be the accountable
yeah.
person develops a certain type of servant leadership that I don't think you would have gotten otherwise, maybe at
Not at that
least.
age, definitely
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
Mm-mm. No,
Those
no.
are both
Agree.
really great stories.
Yeah. Because if you think about it, like I'm an 18-year-old with no experience. Like I don't have experience. I don't have a profitable skill. We're all novices to basic rifle marksmanship. We're all novices to how the military does things. And that was a great learning opportunity. And just thinking back on it, I didn't know twofold, Marie, how much influence I had with the people in the platoon, but you had to have a certain amount of influence with the drill instructor as well to
Yeah.
be selected for those responsibilities. I never considered that.
And
I
when
thought he
people,
was just picking on us.
yeah, well, people feel like they're being punished for excellence or for capacity, but in fact, they're being
Yeah.
honed. They're going into the fire to purify the gold. And they really usually only
Mhm.
recognize it later that it was useful at the time. It doesn't feel pleasant, which you
Yeah.
alluded to. So let's go a little bit more into the groups you were born into. Certainly in Colombia, where you were, you had a bunch of groups that you were just born into those groups. And you
Mhm.
alluded to being a pastor's son and also being the only son. And also, there would have been that whole Southern mentality around you. So there's the influence of
Mhm.
religion, there's the influence of the church. There would have been many other influences that I don't even know about. So if you're reflecting back on that now, what were some of those groups that really stood out for you that have been formative throughout your entire life?
So my parents got married very young. And my dad was already a minister. He's been a minister since he was 17, been a pastor since he was 19. And so my mom was still very young. So I had the fortunate opportunity to see both my parents graduate from college. They
Mhm.
went back as adults.
Mhm.
And I was about 10 years old. So education was a big part of our life, school, really. Our public school, because my mom was a public school teacher. And then my dad's experience at Benedict College, which is a historically Black college and university, was extremely formative for us. We got to see him become a part of a Black Greek letter organization, and he and I both share that now. We're both members of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, but that was formative to me to see those things. And so the educational system that we were embedded in by my mom as an educator and my father as a student and my mother as a student in college, and then our public school experiences really helped to shape and form the person who I am today. And of course, the African American faith tradition in the church and everything that goes along with it. So I am an amalgamation of those two major institutions, especially within the African American tradition and family, of course, because that's where it was all birthed out of.
Well, being an African American and having a position of leadership in the community from the time you were 8 or younger, and then the faith tradition, how would you say that differs from, let's say, the faith tradition of people who are not African American? How is it different? And how is the approach to education different?
Well, it's hard for me to speak about how it's different because that's all I know. I don't know it from a different lens, but from
That's true.
conversations, and maybe some external observations, I'll give it to you this way. Seeing my parents go to school as adults and then me going to school as a teenager has its own nuances that others may not have if you never saw your parents go through something like that.
Hmm.
So other families where their parents have them at a later age, and when they go to school, they've never seen their parents matriculate. Education for them may mean something than it did for us because we got to watch our father and our mother do it. They get to hear about certain stories. And then on the other side, like my parents don't know what it's like to stay in a dorm. My parents don't know what it's like to have a meal plan. That's not the way that they were living. They were commuting students. They were off campus. And so there's certain ways in which they won't be able to relate to the way I matriculated through college because of the way that they did it. And then from a faith tradition perspective, The Judeo-Christian philosophy mindset really, of course, as you know this, basically founded Western civilization,
Totally.
especially with regards to the New World. And so the African American faith tradition was born out of a struggle from Western civilization's founding in Judeo-Christianity. And so that level of struggle and the aspect of oppression without an overt theology of victimization or being a victim just creates a different way to go about living, maybe a different way of embracing struggle, a different way of leveraging certain struggles for the better, a different way of seeing God working in ways that others may not necessarily be able or attuned to seeing those things. And quite frankly, it brings a certain awareness to what privilege you have, if you have any, because in
Yeah,
other faith traditions, they may not be as acutely aware of privilege because to them, what's normal is seen by minorities as a privilege.
exactly.
So I don't know if I answered your question, but
You
those are
did.
just some of my, just musings.
Yeah, it was very beautiful and very articulate. Without struggle, you don't develop that nuanced understanding of where you have to leverage and where you have privilege and where you don't. It's that struggle and that being pushed back and being oppressed that makes you realize that when there's even a little opening, you got to take it.
Right. And it's
It's
not reserved just to like ethnicity. I'm a male. So in the African American faith tradition, a male leader has much more privilege than a leader who is not.
yeah.
And there are instances where we're not aware of our privilege.
And you're an educated
Uh,
male. And you're a
right.
male who, from a young age, was put into a position where he had to develop capacities to lead. So all of those would be privileges. And when you're aware of your own privilege in addition to the privileges of others, I think it makes you more balanced. Don't you think?
Yes. And people who may not be aware of their privilege may also not be aware of how they are exploiting others. And I think the Christian theology helps to provide a framework to where there is some self-examination as well as the examining of others, because the central figure to the Christian faith was the most privileged being in the world who divested himself of those privileges, which
Yeah.
is not necessarily a human norm.
No.
And so that storyline and that perspective and that way of thinking, I think helps to create that balance so
Yes.
that you are grateful for the privileges you've been afforded and still not ungrateful for the privileges that you don't have.
Mm. Gratitude is the antidote to entitlement and also to envy.
Yes.
Your experience of watching your parents graduate and how that affected you is something I identify with. My father had a reading and writing disability, and he was in the war and immigrated from Germany, and he had very little schooling, and he really worked to get any part that he had. But he was a very voracious reader and learned many things from reading. However, my mother was a teacher and graduated, and I saw her struggle and pin up all of her stuff and put them on the bathroom mirror so she'd see them when she woke up in the morning and remember what she needed for the test. And my husband's parents, the same thing. His father was a mechanic who became a teacher, and his mother also. So he saw both his parents go through this, and it was very formational, and I'd never thought of it until you mentioned it, how important that was for me to see that, and how important that was for our children to see me go through that, because I did my master's and PhD much later in life when they were teenagers. So they saw me go through that and what that meant to them, other than being able to make lots of jokes about it. I have no idea, but it just sort of awakened that in me when you told that story.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's important for kids to see their parents working toward something that is a stretch for them. I think it's not enough for us to see our heroes win. We need to see our heroes struggle.
That's true.
That helps us know that maybe we could be one.
Mm-hmm. On the joke side, our youngest daughter created this birthday card, and she wrote inside it, "It's your birthday, and I'm very happy about that. But just remember, anything that starts with post and ends with ism is 100% guaranteed to be boring, boring, boring."
That's hilarious.
Pretty good for a 14-year-old, I think.
Yeah.
So did the fraternity or any other groups that you've joined or become a part of as an adult, has that affected you now as a leader, and culturally, do you see yourself differently?
I mean, unequivocally, yes. Being a part of these organizations, whether it's the military, the church, or whether it's the fraternity that I was fortunate enough to become a part of, it taught me a lot about leadership development and the intentionality and the process of leadership development, how leaders are made. That's why one of my fundamental philosophies about leadership is leaders aren't made by accident. They must be engineered. And several institutions engineer leaders. The military engineers leaders. They have a process to make non-commissioned and commissioned officers. School does as well. You got a process. You can't get a doctorate without going through a process. You got to have your bachelor's. You traditionally got to have your master's. And then you go through a PhD program that makes you a bona fide academician. And so the faculty is staffed by academicians, but the institutions create them, right? Institutions of higher learning are not waiting on another institution to create the future academicians. They do it on their own. And fraternities, they do it as well.
I never thought of that before, but that makes perfect sense that there are institutions that are engineered towards creating leaders. Mm-hmm. That's baked into the mandate.
Yep, it is. The church does it through discipleship. So being a part of those institutions and being processed by all of them gave me a perspective on leadership development, because there's some things that all of them have in common. All of them have some type of selection process where you got to meet criteria to be selected. All of them have an immersion process, like where you are immersed not only in leadership, but you immersed in that culture. You get immersed in the military. You get immersed in higher education. You get immersed in it, to where someone like you who has a PhD, you know things about academia just from being immersed in the culture, how the libraries work, how dissertations operate. And so when it comes to other organizations, they have an immersive process, and no immersive process to make a leader can be absent of inspection. So you're inspected, you're assessed, you're watched. And then after that inspection, there's some type of initiation process. And those things may run concurrently, because to me, hearing stories about dissertations, I know about the military and I know about fraternities, like it is a way of initiation. There's certain levels of stress that you're going to go through with that. And then after that initiation, where you become another person, after the initiation, you become a full-fledged officer. After the baptism, you become a Christian. After the dissertation, you become a doctor. After the initiation, you become a brother in this fraternity or a sister in this sorority. After that, there's a celebration.
So what's the downside of all this?
Well, the downside in a fraternity for a big brother is hazing. That's the downside. Because in that particular leadership development cycle, the leader's looking for camaraderie, to be a part of the group, right? When it comes to education, a teacher, it's really, how can I say this? A part of it is ego, because in some institutions, academicians want to reproduce after their own kind, to the extent where the teacher wants the student to assimilate to their way of being and not just to be who the student should be. In other words, the teacher wants the student to be like the teacher.
Yeah, the institutions tend to feed egos.
Exactly. On the church side, you can become an idol.
Yeah, you can start to think you're like a god or like God, and that's definitely a downside. And then the other thing is groupthink, or thinking that because we don't know something, it doesn't matter or it doesn't exist.
Yeah, that uniformity instead of diversity.
Yeah.
Which is different than what I think we were created to do.
Yeah.
So there's obviously downsides to a lack of intentionality with regard to building leaders. Because when you aren't intentional about building leaders, you create a leadership vacuum, but not a leadership vacuum in the technical sense, just a leadership vacuum in almost like the scientific sense, where the vacuum creates this void, or it exploits a void to where whatever is close to that void gets picked up first. You know, trash gets picked up by vacuums easier than anything else. And some of our leadership positions in our institutions that don't engineer leaders are not putting the best people in positions of responsibility. They're just picking up whoever was closest to it.
And engineering leaders, I really like your trash analogy, by the way.
I got that from Bishop Michael Blue. That doesn't belong to me. I'm here with an academician. I'm going to cite my sources. No, ma'am. That belongs to Bishop Michael Anthony Blue. That's his illustration.
It's a good one. So you're born with a temperament, and, you know, the people are going to say, oh, yeah, you know, he's 50 now, but he was like that when he was 2. So those things don't change, but personality does and should. I mean, somebody whose personality hasn't changed, this is pretty dangerous. That means they haven't learned anything. So what would you say you were born with temperament-wise, and what have you added on personality-wise?
I think I was born with a temperament to inherently trust people.
Ah,
I am not at my best when I'm suspicious of people. I am at my best when I am inherently trusting of others. And so as a child, of course, my first trust is my parents. What you say is right, what you do is right, whatever you say, that's the way it's supposed to go. I was born that way. As I have gotten older, I have learned, there are some challenges, not with being inherently trusting, but with the kinds of people you inherently trust.
because not
And
everybody's
to be a little,
trustworthy.
right. So learning those lessons and being able to assess without being suspicious is hopefully something that I've gained over the years. So I think that's my temperament. My personality, my wife would probably say I'm more extroverted than I was 20 years ago. And I think that just comes with being a little bit more comfortable in my own skin.
Yeah, I'd say I'm more introverted than I was, much more introverted. Maybe that's
It's,
the process of aging if you are learning from it.
yeah. And one of the big things that I've learned is sometimes your responsibility doesn't care about your personality.
That's true too.
So learning how to adapt and really, to me, giving yourself the space to evolve, to not be married to what you were 10 years ago, 5 years ago.
Oh, I love that.
Continue to learn and adapt. I don't know if that's a temperament or a personality thing, but I think it is worthy of being adopted throughout humanity. Let's see how we can continue to learn and appreciate who we've been and who we are and who we can become.
Yeah, this attachment to identity can just become so dangerous and so constricting to the development of the human
Mm-hmm.
spirit, and to the recognition of
Mm-hmm.
truth and the establishment of justice. Limited identities seem to be constricting and causing violence all over the world.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think for me, I remember when I was teaching, you had to believe that everybody could learn, just like Ratatouille, like believes that anybody can cook, right? You have to
That's such a great
learn.
cartoon.
It is.
For anyone who doesn't know Ratatouille, it's a great movie about a rat who learns to be a chef. And
It's
it's
amazing.
So, can you think of a time when you became aware that your understanding of the world was in fact specific to your culture and not just normal?
That's a good one.
That happened to me when I was a child because I would go to different places depending where my mother was teaching. I would have to go to different schools or different babysitters. So I was always oh, I guess this isn't normal from the time I was little. But living in different countries, I realized that what I thought was normal was in fact just specific to my experience and the experience of the people around me. Like in
Wow.
Japan, taking your shoes off every time you go into a different room, and there are
Right.
different slippers for every room. And I
Right.
always got them all mixed
Right.
up. I don't know which was the
Right.
bathroom slippers and which was the living room slippers. And I was constantly insulting people. So that was totally not normal for me, but totally normal for them. Like, what's the matter with this chick? How come she can't figure this out? Yeah. So for you, what's been that moment where you felt something was like, that's not how everybody does things. That must just be me and my culture.
So I think you get little hints of that as you grow up, and then you get one big one when you get married.
Yeah,
So
that's for sure.
when I got married, I thought, oh, I guess everybody doesn't think this way about being this way or being that way or doing things this way, or doing the other. So internally, I learned that when I got married at 25, and we found out very quickly, like, oh, that's just not normal. Yeah, the other time, and I was a little bit older then, this is going to sound funny, but I was in a conversation with some friends of mine several years ago. And while we were talking about, just same things that you're asking here, it hit me that for a vast majority of my life as a child, I was not a minority because of the context in which I grew up. I went to a elementary school that was about 90 to 96% African American. I went to a middle school that was about 90 to 99% African American. Well, let me not say that. It was 96 to 99%. And a high school with the same percentage. And then I went to a historically Black college and university. When I went to seminary, that was one of my first experiences in an institution of higher learning where I was a minority.
Ah, that would have been a
And
shock.
right, because the way that I was trained in those institutions from elementary school, high school, and college, it breeded a certain type of excellence and a certain type of assertiveness in me that I didn't know that others may not be used to because they may have not been in contexts where they saw African American intellectual assertiveness
Hmm.
to ask certain questions. And I never knew what it was to be academically invisible
Hmm.
or to be something other than a smart guy. That's a smart Black guy. I didn't know what that was like.
Can
Well,
you think
that
of a
was
specific incident when that became obvious to you?
when I was in seminary, there was a church history class that was kind of like one of those weed out courses. Like, I mean, those tests were amazing. And in that class, just because of the way my mind is set up, I excelled. And I excelled without asking questions, without saying much in the class. I just did well on the tests that she gave us, but I did not do anything to articulate. And quietly underneath the culture, there may have been some talk and celebration of my performance, but it was never overt, which it would have been if I was in a different context. Because in the context that I grew up in, you celebrated certain levels of excellence, especially if it was African American excellence. I'll give you another example that wasn't just it was in my life, but not directly to me. I never forget going to my son's high school to get something done at his high school. And he never made a B in high school. And his assistant principal didn't know him. I was like, how can this child who is this bright, performing this well in college level courses in this high school, and you as the principal don't know who he is?
Yeah.
And that was pretty surprising with regards to that academic invisibility, that you could excel but still be invisible, even in an academic setting.
Hmm. That's a great example. And also the example of celebrating within the culture, saying this is great. The honor of one is the honor of all kind of mentality, rather
Right.
than just, okay, that's just the way it is, no celebration. And I'm wondering, coming back to my question much earlier, I'm wondering if the difference between, say, a white faith culture and a Black faith culture from the South, it may not be the same, I don't know, in other parts of the States, but I'm wondering if it isn't that element of celebration and voicing praise and voicing the things that you see around you and using that voice.
You just listening to your take on it, I'm thinking about how me giving that speech at 8 years old, the celebration was connected to an increase in influence. And being in an academic setting and not being celebrated is also connected to influence. It's just that you don't get the influence that comes with celebration. That what we celebrate, we inherently give another level of influence to. And if we don't celebrate it, we are restricting influence from flowing to a person who is operating excellent. And so celebration and influence and leadership, they do have a relationship. And I never really considered how excelling as a student on campus, I may have done okay, or even in my son's case, may have done well. But when it came to, having influence with administrators, having influence with his peers through the student body and all the rest of that stuff, it wasn't there. And
Mm-hmm.
a part of that could have been because the celebration keeps you invisible.
Yeah,
It's hard to have invisible influence.
that is for sure. I never thought of this until just now. And the way you explained it makes it even more poignant, something we'll have to explore more later. That point of celebration, I think it's significant. It's significant to visibility, and it's also significant to promoting a culture of encouragement rather than a culture of criticism.
Wow.
So we're close to the end of the interview here, and I wanted to ask you about what brings out the best in you. So when you are asked to work in a particular situation or to speak or to be a part of something, what conditions around you bring out the best in you? What do you need to be at your best?
I have an answer in my mind that I'm trying to not be too forceful with.
Say it the way you want to.
Im-
It's your interview. You can say it any way you like.
impossibility. Impossibility.
What does that
I
mean?
think to bring the best out of a person, you've got to bring them to the brink of what they think is possible and force them to move beyond it.
Wow. And that's what you need too.
I think any heroic leader needs that. A heroic leader doesn't need perfect conditions to excel. They actually need imperfect conditions. They need adversity. They need hardship. Now, that's a hard sell to people who, want to be leaders. But when they get in a position and they find out that leading is not easy business, leading is quite risky and difficult, they learn how to take advantage of adversity because there are things that are created possible by problems that perfection doesn't make possible.
Yeah.
And
Transformation.
exactly, exactly. You and I wouldn't be in business if there weren't challenges in the world.
That's for sure.
And those challenges are helping to perfect what we bring to the table as we transform others. So we need impossibilities.
So for you to be at your best, I need to make stuff hard for you.
Yep. That's
I'm
that.
thinking that's not my role, though. I'm thinking
Well,
if
sir, you
I
don't have to do what circumstances can do, like, but that's the way that it's going to be. Like, what
Mhm.
is a mathematician without a problem to solve?
Oh, there you go. Perfect analogy.
There was something that brought the best out of Einstein, something that brought the best out of Rene Descartes, something that brought the best out of Euclid and Archimedes. There was something that brought the best out of them. It was a question, it was a challenge, it was a problem. Like, what does that shadow right there mean? Right? That's what that was. And if you want to bring the best out of me, I mean, that's the way that I found it in the time that I've been on the planet.
Hmm.
Now, I'm saying this, Maria, still thinking that I would be better if it was perfect. Right?
Well, maybe it's a
Yeah.
balance between encouragement and challenge because you wouldn't have the unique combination that you have without the encouragement of your background, which you already described,
Yes.
and the celebration of it. And at the same time, this expectation to stand and deliver, which created in a way a kind of an artificial hardship. But then life has hardships. You can't avoid it. But you came to it from a position of confidence. So you're open to the challenge, maybe more than other
Sure.
people might be who didn't have that foundation that you've got.
Mm, yeah. I've had the privilege of having a few wins
Hmm.
because those few wins build your confidence. So if you do a hard thing and you accomplish it, then the next hard thing, you're confident that you can accomplish that too.
That is true.
So
I'm sure you provide that mentorship and that sense of you can do it and I'm next to you. I'm on your side. I'm going to accompany you with this. And then now's your moment to
that's my,
shine. And I know you can do
yep,
it. Yeah, I'm sure you do that.
yep. Exactly that.
So, what would you like to promote? This is your soapbox moment before we end today.
I'm so full from this conversation. There's several rabbit holes that my mind is just running through at the moment. But I think something that I've been mulling over significantly is platforms like this, conversations like this help those who are listening that are leading understand that they are not in it by themselves and that they are not alone. When you ask me what I need to bring out the best in me,
Hmm.
I don't think I gave you a full answer. I gave you the hard part, which was impossibility. But I think the other part I need is help.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of leaders out there who don't have help, don't have community.
Mm-hmm.
I am who I am because of a community. So that's also what I need to bring out the best in me. And too often people gain leadership responsibility and they become leaders in their organizations. And in their organizations, they don't have any peers, but they don't have any peers outside of the organization either. And so they are leading without community. And that type of loneliness can create an anxiety that really depletes confidence and can create some destructive behaviors.
That's for sure. I've
I
talked
know
to a
we
few of
are
them
in
on
the
this
behavior.
podcast too.
Really?
Yeah, and pretty much all the ones that had that kind of loneliness were suicidal or became addicts and then had to dig themselves out and find their purpose.
Yep. And we are committed, an 180 management group, to being an answer to that type of loneliness because the world is better when you've got somebody on your side partnering with you to make sure that you're at your best. And none of us can be at our best, especially leaders, without community.
Mm.
So hopefully it's something that, we've talked about here resonates with others to where they say, that's a part of my story. That resonated with you so you wouldn't feel like you were by yourself in it.
Mm.
And as confident as we both are in our requisite lanes of life, we both know that we can't do this by ourselves.
Hmm.
And that's what you need. You need hardship and help to be at your best.
That is a beautiful spot for us to end. Anthony, thank you so much for this thoughtful and insightful time that I had the privilege of sharing with you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the privilege of engaging in this wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
What a pleasure it was to interview Anthony A. Dix Jr. about his cultural and leadership influences. From the Southern U.S. Black Baptist church culture, then Black college and fraternity to military culture, Anthony learned a few things about how to build leadership using his voice and his ability to stand and deliver. Even more important were the support each of these communities provided and the standards of excellence they called him to achieve. From these foundations of encouragement and celebration, Anthony developed the confidence to overcome hardships and to meet challenges with courage. His approach is to be a part of, yet lead, in a way that takes the group a few steps further in the development of their own capacity. I loved this interview with Anthony and took away these key points. Number 1, we are stronger together, especially when we validate each other. Number 2, unless we detach our identity from the person we were 10 years ago, we can't embrace the learning life offers to us to grow. Number 3, celebration is an important part of leadership. Celebration renders the invisible visible and brings collective pride to the honoring of one. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, and that you will check out Anthony's company, 180 Management, which he runs with his wife. The best way to say thank you is to share this episode with a friend. The second best way is to go to my website, shiftworkplace.com/podcast, and leave a voice or a text review as soon as you see the I would love to hear from you box. Thank you for listening, and may culture and leadership connections continue to guide and inspire your day. Newsflash: listeners can now interact with Culture and Leadership Connections podcast by leaving a voice or text message on Fan List. It is a fun and quick way to let me know what you liked, ask a question, or leave a suggestion. I will feature some of the voice messages on upcoming episodes. You might be surprised to hear your own voice, but only if you leave a message, of course. So to leave your personal message or your question, go to shiftworkplace.com/podcast and click on the fan list link to leave it. I can hardly wait to hear what you have to say.